They dumped 2 million refugees on Mars. We turned it into paradise in 25 days. The consortium fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a bad omen. 17 massive warships arranged themselves in a perfect formation near Jupiter. Behind them came the real cargo, over 200 transport ships, old and beaten, held together by rust and desperate prayers. These ships carried 2 million souls who had nowhere else to go. Ambassador Elena Vasquez watched the fleet approach from the observation deck of Unity Station. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen too many diplomatic games. Her assistant, a young man named Thomas, stood beside her with a tablet full of data about the incoming refugees. The Valen, Thomas said quietly, amphibious species. They need warmth and humidity to survive. Their home world was called Val-Aura Prime. Was Elena asked. The harvest combine stripped it bare. Mining operations, they took everything valuable from the planet and left it a dead rock. The Velen had no choice but to flee. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She had read about the harvest combine. They were one of the largest corporate entities in the galaxy. They bought planets, extracted their resources, and moved on. Legal under consortium law, profitable beyond measure, and absolutely devastating for anyone who happened to live on those planets. The communication screen flickered to life. A consortium official appeared. He was a tall creature with pale blue skin and 4 clears throat, eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His name was High Delegate Voraxis, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. Ambassador Vasquez, Voraxis said smoothly, the Galactic Consortium extends its greetings to the human species. We come bearing a great honor for your young civilization. Elena kept her face neutral. In her experience, when someone from the consortium mentioned honor, it usually meant they were about to dump a problem in your lap. We are always happy to receive the consortium, Elena replied. What honor do you speak of? Voraxis spread his hands wide in a gesture of generosity. The Valen people have lost their home world through unfortunate circumstances. They are now refugees in need of a new home. The consortium has decided in its infinite wisdom to offer humanity the privilege of hosting these displaced beings. Thomas leaned close to Elena. 2 million refugees. They expect us to refuse. Elena understood immediately. This was a trap. If humanity refused, the consortium would paint them as selfish and cruel. If humanity accepted, they would struggle to care for so many aliens with such different needs. Either way, the consortium won. We accept, Elena said. Voraxis blinked all 4 eyes at once. Whatever response he had prepared, that was not it. I beg your pardon, he stammered. We accept the refugees, all of them. We would be honored to provide them with a new home. The High Delegate recovered quickly, but Elena caught the flash of confusion. His eyes. He had expected arguments, negotiations, demands for compensation. Not simple acceptance. How wonderful, Voraxis said, though his voice suggested it was anything but wonderful. However, there are certain conditions. For biosecurity reasons, the villain cannot be settled on Earth itself. They must be housed elsewhere in your system, Mars. Elena said immediately. We will settle them on Mars. Now Voraxis could not hide his smile. It was the smile of someone who had just watched their opponent walk Into a trap. Mars was a frozen wasteland, with thin atmosphere and brutal conditions. The human settlements there numbered barely 50,000 people living in pressurized domes for an amphibious species that needed warmth and water. Mars was a death sentence. How generous of you, Varaxis said. We will maintain the refugees in orbit while you prepare facilities. How long will you need? Year 2, 25 days, Alina said. Silence filled the communication channel. Even Thomas turned to stare at his boss. 25 days, Varaxis repeated slowly. Standard days. Yes, we will be ready to receive the Valon in 25 days. You can maintain them in orbit until then. I trust the consortium can manage that much. There was a veiled insult in her words, and Varaxis caught it. His jaw tightened. Of course, 25 days, then we shall watch with great interest. The transmission ended. Thomas immediately grabbed Alina's arm. Ambassador, with all due respect, have you lost your mind? We cannot build facilities for 2 million amphibious aliens on Mars in 25 days. It's impossible. Alelina turned to him with a strange light in her eyes. Thomas, do you know what the consortium has never understood about humans? What? They see our governments and our corporations. They see our militaries and our scientists, but they have never understood what happens when we all decide to work together. She pulled out her personal communicator. Get me a direct line to the Secretary General. Then patch me through to every major news network on Earth. Thomas scrambled to obey. Within minutes, Alina was broadcasting to 8 billion people. Citizens of Earth, she began. Today, the Galactic Consortium has asked us to prove what kind of species we are. 2 million refugees from a destroyed world need our help. They need food. They need shelter. They need hope. They need a home. And we are going to give it to them. She paused, letting her words sink in. Across 100 nations, the consortium expects us to fail. They expect us to turn these people away or watch them die. They do not know us. They do not know what we can do when we stand together. So let me tell you what is going to happen. In 25 days we are going to build a paradise on Mars. Not just survival shelters, a paradise. Place where the villain can thrive, not merely exist. A place that tells the galaxy exactly who humanity is. She took a breath. I'm calling on every engineer, every builder, every doctor, every teacher, every artist, every person who has ever wanted to make a difference. We need you. They need you. This is our moment. This is who we are. The broadcast ended. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Thomas's tablet started buzzing, then his backup tablet, then every communication device in the room. Ambassador, Thomas said, his voice shaking, I'm receiving volunteer registration, thousands of them, tens of thousands. He looked up with wide eyes. Millions. Alina nodded. Good. Now the real work begins. On Mars, Governor Sarah Chen was already moving. She had watched the broadcast from her office in Heli's Basin, the largest human settlement on the Red Planet. Within an hour of Alina's speech, she had called an emergency meeting of every department head in the colony. Clear the schedule, she ordered. Cancel everything that isn't life support. We're about to build the biggest construction project in human history, and we've got less than a month to do it. Her chief engineer, a grizzled man named Rodriguez, shook his head. Governor, I want to help these People as much as anyone, but we don't have the resources. We don't have the manpower. We barely have enough habitation space for ourselves. Check. The shipping manifest from Earth again. Chen said. Rodriguez frowned and pulled up the data. Then he stared at his screen for a long time. Governor, there are heavy lifters launching from every major spaceport on Earth. Construction, drones, prefab habitat modules, atmospheric processors, water extraction equipment. He scrolled through the list in disbelief. This is enough material to triple our settlement size. Where did all this come from? Chen smiled grimly. We've been stockpiling for the terraforming project, moving slowly because there was no rush. Well, now there's a rush, but even with all this equipment, the labor, the first wave of human volunteers launches in 12 hours, engineers, construction workers, dome specialists. They've been training for Mars conditions for years, waiting for their chance to help build something new. Rodriguez sat back in his chair. We actually might be able to do this. We're going to do this, Chen corrected him. Now stop telling me why it's impossible and start telling me how we make it happen. Aboard the refugee fleet, the villain waited in silence. They had been waiting for a long time, months in crowded ships with recycled air and rationed food. Many had died already from illness and despair. The elders spent their days composing death songs, preparing their people for the end. Young villain named Mira pressed her face against a viewport, staring at the strange red planet below. She was barely an adult, old enough to remember her home world, but young enough that the memories were already fading. She remembered swimming in warm lakes under a purple sky. She remembered the songs her mother would sing. She remembered the day the harvest combine came and the day they were told they had to leave. Now she watched the red planet and wondered what new suffering awaited them there. Cold and dry, the elders said, a place where beings like them would slowly wither and die. The consortium had sent them here to be forgotten. But something strange was happening on that red planet. Lights were appearing in the darkness, not just a few scattered points like before, but clusters of brightness spreading across the surface. Ships were descending from orbital stations. Machines were moving. Something was being built. Mira's grandmother, an old poet named Salith, shuffled over to stand beside her. What do you see, little one? Salith asked. Lights, Mira said. More lights than before. The humans are building something. Salith squinted at the distant planet. The consortium expects them to fail. Do you think they will? The old poet was quiet for a long moment. She had seen too much cruelty in her long life, the destruction of her world, the indifference of the galaxy, the slow death of hope. But something in her heart stirred as she watched those lights spread across the Martian surface. I do not know, Salith admitted, but I have never seen any species move so fast. Perhaps she trailed off, afraid to say the words. Perhaps what grandmother? Salith put her arm around her granddaughter. Perhaps we should wait before singing any more death songs. High above Mars, aboard the consortium flagship, High Delegate Varaxis watched the same lights. Through his observation window, his four eyes narrowed with each new point of brightness that appeared. His aide approached nervously. High Delegate, sensors are detecting unusual activity on the Martian surface. The humans appear to be deploying some kind of automated construction systems. What kind of systems we are not certain. They are not in any of our databases. The humans never reported possessing such technology. Varaxis said nothing, he simply watched. As Mars began to glow, 25 days they had claimed they could build a paradise in. 25 days, it was impossible, it had to be. Impossible, so why did he suddenly feel afraid? The news spread across Earth like wildfire within 6 hours of Ambassador Vasquez's broadcast. 200 million people had signed up to help in some way. The sheer volume crashed the volunteer registration servers 3 times before engineers managed to stabilize them. Not everyone could go to Mars. Most people understood that, but everyone could contribute something. In Tokyo, a team of marine biologists worked through the night analyzing every scrap of data about villain biology. They needed to understand what kind of water chemistry the villain required, what temperatures kept them healthy, what microorganisms lived in their native ecosystems. By morning they had created a detailed environmental blueprint that they uploaded for the construction teams on Mars. In Salo, a retired grandmother named Isabella organized her entire neighborhood to raise funds. She was 73 years old and had never met an alien in her life, but she had raised 4 children and 11 grandchildren, and she knew what it meant to need help when times were hard. These villains are someone's children, too, she told her neighbors, someone's grandchildren. We help because that is what decent people do. In Seoul, a 15-year-old girl named Gi Yan downloaded everything she could find about the villain language. It was complex with sounds that human throats struggled to produce. She practiced anyway, recording herself, adjusting her pronunciation, learning simple phrases. Welcome, we are happy you are here. You are safe now. On Luna, the orbital factories shifted their entire production schedule. They had been manufacturing components for a new space station. That project was put on hold. Now every assembly line focused on habitat modules designed for Velum needs: warmer interiors, higher humidity, larger water features. The engineers worked in shifts, sleeping their chairs when exhaustion overwhelmed them. And on Mars the transformation began. Governor Chen stood on a ridge overlooking the Hellas Basin as the first heavy lifters descended through the thin atmosphere. Each ship carried construction drones, prefab modules, and something the consortium had never seen before. Von Naumann constructors, Rodriguez explained, standing beside her self-replicating machines. We give them raw materials and basic instructions, and they build more of themselves while also building whatever we tell them to. The consortium doesn't know we have these. Rodriguez shook his head. We developed them quietly, never saw a reason to advertise. We figured we'd use them someday for large-scale terraforming projects. He gestured at the swarm of machines now spreading across the basin. Well, today is that someday. The constructors were small at first, each one barely the size of a house cat. They scattered across the Martian surface like metal insects, boring into the red soil, extracting iron and silicon and aluminum. Within hours, they had built larger versions of themselves. Within days, they had built fabrication units that could manufacture building materials on site. Chen watched a dome framework rise from nothing. The constructors assembled it piece by piece, welding joints with precision that no human hand could match. Other Machines followed behind, installing transparent panels, sealing edges, connecting power systems. How long, she asked. First dome will be habitable. 48 hours, Rodriguez said. He paused, then smiled. We're building 20. Simultaneously, the consortium observers watched all of this from their ships in orbit. They had expected to see struggling colonists trying to erect basic shelters. Instead, they witnessed an industrial revolution compressed into days. High Delegate Varaxis demanded constant reports. Each one made him more uneasy. They have deployed over 2 million construction units, his aide reported. The units are self-replicating. They are producing building materials from Martian soil at a rate we cannot accurately measure because it keeps increasing. How is this possible? Varaxis demanded. We have surveyed human technology for decades. Nothing in our records suggests they possess this capability. It appears they never told us. Varaxis felt cold. What else had the humans not told them? On Earth, the work continued at every level of society. Governments allocated emergency funds, corporations donated equipment, universities shared research. The usual barriers that slowed human cooperation seemed to melt away in the face of this shared purpose. A clothing manufacturer in Indonesia retold their factory to produce thermal suits designed for villain bodies. A food company in France started developing nutrition bars that match villain dietary needs. A music producer in Nigeria composed calming soundscapes based on audio samples from the Valen home world that refugees had preserved on damaged data drives. None of these people had ever met a villain. None of them expected anything in return. They simply saw a need and tried to fill it. By day 7, the first 3 archaeology domes were complete, each one covered an area of 10 square km. Inside, construction crews were installing the environments that would make these spaces feel like home for the villain. Dr. Maria Santos was the lead environmental designer for Dome 1. She stood at the center of what would become an artificial wetland, directing teams of workers and machines. The water temperature needs to be between 25 and 30 degrees C, she instructed. Warmer than humans like it, but essential for comfort. We need to install heating elements throughout the basin, and the humidity has to stay above 80%. Her assistant frowned at the requirements. That's going to feel like a sauna to us. Then we'll sweat a little. The Valon have already lost everything. The least we can do is make sure they're comfortable. The wetland took shape over the following days. Engineers carve channels and pools into the dome floor. Biologists introduced specially cultivated plants that could thrive in the artificial environment while providing the visual and chemical cues of flora. Artists painted murals on the dome walls depicting scenes from mythology, research from refugee interviews, and cultural databases. On day 10, a small shuttle docked with one of the refugee ships. Dr. Amara Akeper, a physician from Kenya, stepped aboard to begin medical assessments. She had volunteered for this mission the moment she heard about the refugees. Conditions on the ship were worse than she had expected. 2 million people crammed into vessels designed for a fraction of that number. The air was stale and thick with the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. Many of the villain were sick, more were simply broken, their spirits crushed by months of loss and uncertainty. Amara found me sitting alone in a crowded corridor pressed against a wall with her arms wrapped around her knees. The young Valon looked up with suspicious eyes. When the human approached, "Hello, Amra," said gently. She had spent the journey practicing simple valent phrases. "My name is Amara. I'm a doctor. I am here to help." Mira said nothing. She had heard promises before. The consortium had promised them safety when they fled their home world. That promise had led to crowded ships and dying friends, and now a frozen red planet. Amara knelt down to meet Mira's eyes. "I know you have no reason to trust me. You do not know me. You do not know my people, but I want to show you something." She pulled out a small tablet and activated a display. Images appeared on the screen. Domes rising from the Martian surface. Warm pools being filled with water. Plants growing under artificial lights. Humans and machines working side by side without rest. "This is what we are building for you," Amara said. "Not just shelters, a home with warmth and water, and everything we could think of to make you comfortable." Mira stared at the images. Her grandmother Sally shuffled over to look as well. The old poet's eyes widened as she watched the footage. "Why?" Sale asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Amara considered the question carefully. It was a question many humans had asked themselves over the past 10 days. Why pour so much effort into helping people they had never met? Why volunteer precious time and resources for beings so different from themselves? "Because you needed help," Amara said finally, "and we could provide it." "Is that not enough?" Sally had no answer. In her long life she had rarely seen such simple kindness offered without strings attached. Word spread quickly through the refugee ships. The humans were building something for them, not death camps, not bare survival bunkers. Something with water and warmth and beauty. Many refused to believe it. They had learned too well that hope was dangerous, but others dared to dream. Small gatherings formed where watched the construction footage together. They pointed out details. "Look at those pools. See how the humans are planting those trees. Did you notice the murals on the walls?" On day 14, the consortium's patience ran thin. High Delegate Varaxis requested an emergency meeting with Ambassador Vasquez. "Ambassador," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I must express the consortium's concern regarding your activities on Mars." "Concern?" Elelina raised an eyebrow. "We are preparing facilities for refugees as agreed. Is that not what you wanted?" "We expected reasonable preparations, adequate shelters, basic amenities." Varaxis leaned forward. "What you are building appears to be significantly more than adequate. I'm sorry. Is there a rule against being too helpful?" The High Delegate's jaw tightened. "The consortium merely wishes to ensure that proper protocols are being followed. Perhaps our observers could be granted surface access to inspect the facilities." Elena smiled. "Of course, we have nothing to hide. In fact, let me arrange a full tour for your observers. I think they'll be quite impressed." She ended the transmission and allowed herself a small laugh. The consortium had sent the Veil into Mars, expecting them to die in obscurity. Instead, humanity was turning their cruelty into a spotlight that the entire galaxy could see. On the surface, Rodriguez greeted the consortium observers with professional courtesy. He led them through Dome 1, now fully Climate-controlled, its pools filled with warm water that steamed gently. The humid air, as you can see, Rodriguez explained, we've replicated the essential features of environmental preferences. Water temperature is maintained at 28 degrees C. Humidity averages 82%. We've installed bioluminescent lighting that matches the spectrum of Valera prime sun. One observer, a forearmed being covered in chitinous plates, made a skeptical sound. You claim to have built all this in 2 weeks. Impossible. You must have had these facilities prepared in advance. You're welcome to check the orbital records. 2 weeks ago, this was empty ground, covered in Martian dust. Would you like to see the time-lapse footage? We've been documenting the entire construction process. Rodriguez showed them the footage on a large display. The observers watched in silence as structures rose from nothing, as machines multiplied and built and refined with tireless efficiency. How many humans are working on this project? Another observer asked. On Mars, specifically, about 12,000 now, but the volunteer registry on Earth has over 300 million names. We've had to turn most of them away because we simply don't have room for everyone who wants to help. Observers exchanged glances. 300 million volunteers for refugees who are not even the same species. Why? The chitinous observer demanded. Why would so many of your people sacrifice time and resources for strangers? What do you gain? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I suppose we gain neighbors, he said. Finally, friends, maybe if we're lucky. But mostly, he looked around at the dome, at the warm pools and growing plants in the murals telling stories of a lost world. Mostly, we just gained the knowledge that when people needed help, we helped. That's who we want to be. The observers had no response to that. They finished their tour in silence and returned to their ships to file their reports. That night, Governor Chen received a message from Ambassador Vasquez. Day 14. Complete. The consortium is scared. They're starting to realize this isn't going the way they planned. How are we doing on timeline? Chen looked out her window at the cluster of glowing domes spread across the basin. 1 day ago, that landscape had been empty red desert. Now it held the beginnings of a city. We're ahead of schedule, she replied. The Valen can start landing on day 15. All 2 million of them can be on the surface within a week after that. Excellent. Make sure the cameras are rolling. I want the whole galaxy to see what happens next. Chen smiled grimly. Oh, they'll see everything. Day 15 arrived with the rising of Earth on the Martian horizon. In Dome 1, the final preparations were complete. Pools gleamed under soft bioluminescent lights. Warm mist drifted through the air. The murals on the walls showed scenes of purple skies and gentle waters, memories of a world that no longer existed. The first transport shuttle descended through the thin Martian atmosphere. It carried 300 Valen, mostly families with young children and elderly who could not endure the crowded refugee ships any longer. Governor Chen stood at the main landing pad with a delegation of human volunteers. They had rehearsed this moment for days. They knew that the villain would be frightened, confused, expecting the worst. The humans needed to show them something different. The shuttle doors opened. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a villain elder appeared in the doorway, squinting against the strange Martian light. His Name was Kilos, and on his home world he had been a poet of great renown. Now he was simply a refugee, tired and hungry, and expecting to die on a cold rock far from everything he had ever known. Kilos took one step down the ramp, then another. He looked around at the dome that surrounded the landing area, at the warm air that touched his skin, at the humans who waited in silence with gentle smiles on their faces. Then he looked beyond them through the transparent walls of the landing dome into the main habitat area. He saw water, not a small basin or utilitarian tank, but a proper wetland stretching into the distance, warm pools connected by flowing channels, plants with broad leaves floating on the surface, mist rising from heated waters. It looked like it could not possibly look like. Kios fell to his knees. Chen rushed forward, worried that something was wrong, but then she saw that the old Valen was weeping, tears streaming down his face in the warm, humid air. Home, Kielthos whispered. It looks like home. Other Valen were emerging from the shuttle now, drawn by the commotion. They crowded around their elder, following his gaze to the wetlands beyond. One by one they understood what they were seeing. The sounds of weeping multiplied as the weight of months of despair suddenly lifted. A small villain child, no more than 5 years old, wiggled free from her mother's grasp and ran toward the nearest pool. Her mother cried out in alarm, but Chin just smiled and waved for her to let the child go. The girl splashed into the warm water with a shriek of pure joy. It was the first happy sound any villain had made in a very long time. Within hours, the landing area was overwhelmed with arriving shuttles. The human volunteers worked tirelessly, guiding families to their assigned housing, answering questions, providing food and medical care. Dr. Offer had set up a clinic in one of the smaller domes, treating ailments that had festered during the long journey, but the medical emergencies were fewer than she had expected. Something about being on solid ground again, surrounded by warmth and water, seemed to heal the Valen in ways medicine could not. By evening, over 10,000 Valen had landed. The wetlands were full of swimming figures, some exploring, some simply floating in the warm water with their eyes closed. Children played on the shores while elders sat together, speaking quietly about things they had never expected to discuss again. The future hope plans. Mira landed with her grandmother Salith in the third wave of shuttles. The young Valen had prepared herself to be disappointed. The images Dr. Okafor had shown her on the refugee ship must have been exaggerated. Nothing could really look that welcoming, that comfortable, that much like the home she barely remembered. She was wrong when she stepped out of the shuttle and breathed the warm, humid air, when she saw the pools and the plants and the soft lighting that reminded her of childhood. Something broke inside her. Not broke in a bad way, more like a wall crumbling, a dam releasing. All the grief she had been holding back came flooding out. Salith held her granddaughter as Mira sobbed. The old poet looked around at the dome, at Clear's throat, the humans moving among her people with gentle efficiency, at the children already playing in the water. They actually did it, Salith murmured. 25 days. They said 25 days, and they actually did it. A human volunteer approached them. She was young, barely older than Mira, with dark hair and kind eyes. Welcome to Mars, the volunteer said in carefully practiced Valen. Her pronunciation was not Perfect, but the effort was unmistakable. My name is Guy Yan. I have been learning your language so I could speak with you. Please let me know if you need anything at all. Sally stared at this young human who had spent weeks learning a language she might never use again just so she could make strangers feel welcome. Why Sale asked. It was the same question she had asked Dr. Akefer. She still did not truly understand the answer. Guy tilted her head, considering there is a word in my language, Young. It is difficult to translate. It means a feeling of deep connection and care for others, not because they have done something for you, simply because they exist and you can help them. You feel this, Jong, for people you have never met. We are meeting now, John said with a smile. And yes, even before we met, we cared about you. That is just how we are. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. More Valen arrived every hour, the domes filled with life in ways the human builders had only imagined during their frantic construction efforts. In Dome 3, a group of Velen musicians discovered that the humans had installed acoustic chambers designed to replicate the sound qualities of Velen concert halls. They wept as they played their first songs in months, their music echoing through the dome while hundreds of their people gathered to listen. In Dome 7, a villain chef worked alongside a human culinary team to recreate traditional dishes using Mars-grown ingredients. The substitutions were not perfect, but they were close enough to bring tears of nostalgia to those who tasted them. In Dome 12, a school was already operating. Villain children sat beside human children, learning about each other's cultures while their teachers figured out curriculum on the fly. The language barrier was challenging, but children have always been better than adults at finding ways to communicate. The galaxy watched. Consortium news networks had initially covered the story with dismissive skepticism. Another failed human project, they predicted. Another embarrassment for the young species who thought they could play with the adults. But as the footage kept coming, as images of thriving Bellin communities spread across interstellar networks, the tone began to shift. Commentators who had mocked humanity's ambitions now struggled to explain what they were seeing. How had this primitive species built paradise in less than a month? Where had they found the resources, the technology, the will? On a dozen different worlds, ordinary citizens watched the coverage and felt something stir in their hearts. The consortium had presented the refugee crisis as an unfortunate but unavoidable tragedy. They had lost their world, yes, but these things happened. The galaxy was harsh. Life was cheap. Now those citizens were watching a species that refused to accept that philosophy, a species that looked at 2 million suffering strangers and said, no, not acceptable. We can do better. We will do better. The Harvest Combine, the corporate entity that had destroyed the Valen home world, began to feel pressure they had never anticipated. Their stock price dropped as investors grew nervous about association with the company's growing reputation for cruelty. Activists on multiple worlds organized boycotts. Politicians who had previously accepted combined donations suddenly became unavailable for comment. In their gleaming headquarters on a world called Commerce Prime, the Combine board of directors held emergency meetings. They had followed all regulations. They had compensated the Valen according to Legal requirements, they had done nothing wrong, at least by the standards of consortium law, but humans did not seem to care about consortium law. Humans cared about results, and now the galaxy was looking at those results and asking uncomfortable questions. On day 20, the last of the 2 million villain touched down on Martian soil. The refugee ships in orbit were finally empty. Governor Chen stood at the main observation deck, looking out over a transformed landscape where barren red desert had once stretched to the horizon. Now a city of domes glowed with life. Light poured from a dozen arches. The air filtration systems hummed with constant activity, processing the Martian atmosphere and distributing it through climate-controlled habitats. Roads connected the domes built by the tireless constructor machines that continued to work even as the first phase completed. Rodriguez joined her at the window. He looked exhausted. Everyone did. 3 weeks of nonstop labor had pushed every human on Mars to their limits. We did it, Rodriguez said quietly. I still cannot believe we did it. What's the final count? 2,043,000. Clears throat. 712 Valen now on the surface, plus about 20,000 human support staff and volunteers. We've already started construction on the next phase of habitats. Should have room for another 500,000 within 3 months. Chen nodded slowly. And after that we keep building. The terraforming project is accelerating. Anyway, the constructor swarms have identified mineral deposits we didn't know about. The atmospheric processors are exceeding expected output. He paused. Some of the Valen engineers have been asking to help. They want to contribute. Let them. This is their home. Now they should have a hand in building it. A message arrived on Chen's communicator. It was from Ambassador Vasquez. Excellent work, Governor. The consortium has requested a formal meeting tomorrow. I suspect they're going to try to take credit for everything somehow, or possibly threaten us. Hard to tell with them. Chen laughed. Despite her exhaustion, what do you want me to do? Keep the cameras rolling. Whatever happens next, I want every eye in the galaxy watching. That night, Calto stood at the edge of a pool in Dome 1, watching stars appear through the transparent ceiling. They were different stars than the ones he had known on his home world. Different constellations, different patterns, but stars were stars, and water was water. And life, it seemed, went on. A human woman approached him. She introduced herself as Elena Vasquez, the ambassador who had accepted the Valen when the consortium offered them as a burden to be endured. How are your people settling in? Elena asked. Carlos considered the question. Settling in, an interesting phrase. We are still learning what that means. For so long we have been running, fleeing, surviving. The idea of staying somewhere, it takes time to believe. Take all the time you need. This is your home now for as long as you want it. Why did you do this? The consortium expected you to refuse or to fail. Either outcome would have suited them. Instead, you chose the harder path. Elena was quiet for a moment. I've been asked that question many times in the past 3 weeks. By my own people, by consortium officials, by Valen refugees who still cannot quite believe this is real. She looked out at the water, at the Valen family swimming and playing and simply being alive. The honest answer is that we did it because we could. We had the resources, we had the technology, we had The people willing to help, the only question was whether we would use those things for good, and the galaxy what do you hope the galaxy takes from this? Elena smiled. I hope they take whatever they need. Maybe some species will see this and be inspired to do better. Maybe some will feel ashamed of how they've treated refugees in the past. Maybe some will just be annoyed that the humans are making them look bad. She shrugged. It doesn't really matter what they think. What matters is what we do, and today we chose to help. Callus nodded slowly. There's a poem from my home world. It speaks of the moment when light first touches water at dawn, the way the world seems to wake from darkness, the way hope returns after the long night. He turned to face the human ambassador. I thought I would never see such a dawn again. I thought my people's long night would never end, but today he gestured at the warm pools around them, at the glowing domes, at the children playing without fear. Today the light has touched the water again. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away and reached out to clasp the old poet's arm. This is just the beginning, she said. Tomorrow the consortium arrives, and then we'll see what kind of galaxy we're really living in. The consortium fleet arrived with the ceremony of a funeral procession, 20 warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the distant sun. At their center flew the diplomatic vessel of High Delegate Varaxis, its golden markings proclaiming the authority of the Galactic Consortium. Ambassador Vasquez watched them approach from the observation deck of Unity Station. She wore her formal diplomatic uniform, pressed and clean, though she had barely slept in days. The negotiations ahead would require every ounce of skill she possessed there, bringing a lot of firepower for a diplomatic meeting, Thomas observed nervously. Intimidation, Elena replied. The consortium doesn't know how else to operate. They've ruled through fear for so long that they've forgotten any other method. Should we be worried? Elena smiled. Not anymore. The meeting took place in the main conference hall of Unity Station. Varaxis entered with his usual parade of aides and translators, his 4 eyes sweeping the room with barely concealed contempt. Behind him came representatives from a dozen other consortium species, all arranged to display the full weight of galactic authority. Elena sat alone at the human side of the table, just one woman facing an empire. Ambassador Vasquez. Varaxis began, his voice dripping with false warmth. The consortium wishes to express its appreciation for humanity's efforts regarding the Valon refugees. Your species has exceeded all expectations. Thank you, High Delegate. Though I suspect you haven't come all this way just to offer compliments. Varaxis's smile tightened. Indeed, the consortium has been reviewing the situation and has reached a conclusion. Given the unexpected success of the Martian settlement, we believe it would be best for all parties if the Valon were transferred to a proper consortium. World transferred, relocated, resettled, moved to a more suitable location within consortium territory. Surely you understand that Mars cannot remain a permanent home. It is far from the center of galactic civilization. The Vian would be better served elsewhere. Elena leaned back in her chair. I see, and this suitable location would be where exactly? The details are still being arranged. Rest assured the consortium will provide adequate facilities. Adequate, not the paradise You claimed we couldn't build, but adequate. Elelina shook her head. Slowly, with respect, High Delegate. That proposal is unacceptable, Varaxis. Blinked all four eyes. I'm sorry. The Valen are our neighbors now. They stay. As long as they wish, forever if they choose. We're not handing them over to be scattered across the galaxy where no one will ever hear from them again. The consortium delegates shifted uneasily. This was not how small species were supposed to talk to the consortium. This was not how the galaxy worked. Varaxis dropped his pretense of diplomacy. Ambassador, I don't think you understand the situation. Humanity is a young species. You have barely begun to explore beyond your home system. You have no allies, no military presence, no power in galactic affairs. Consortium has maintained order across 10,000 worlds for longer than your species has existed. We do not make requests, we make decisions. And what decision have you made exactly? The Valen will be transferred to Consortium custody. Your settlement on Mars will be designated as a temporary facility, and you will be reminded of your place in the galactic order. Varaxis leaned forward. Do I make myself clear? Elelina was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached for a control panel built into the table and pressed a button. I think it's time for a demonstration, she said. Across the solar system, lights began to appear. Around Earth, defense platforms emerged from concealment. They had been built in secret, hidden in the orbital debris and construction zone that humans use for their space infrastructure. Each platform bristled with weapons that the consortium had never catalogued. Around Luna, a ring of stations activated, their power signatures suddenly visible to every sensor in the system. More weapons, more defenses, a fortress belt protecting humanity's home world. Around Mars, new structures came online. They had been disguised as mining operations and atmospheric processors. Now they revealed their true nature: military installations capable of defending the planet against any threat. And beyond, in the asteroid belt and around the outer planets, shipyards lit up with activity. Ships that had been under construction in secret for decades were finally being shown to the galaxy. A fleet, a real fleet, not Clear's throat. The handful of aging vessels the consortium had observed, hundreds of warships designed and built by a species that had learned to hide their true capabilities. Varaxis stared at his sensor displays in disbelief. This is impossible. Our surveys never detected any of this. That was rather the point, Elena said calmly. You surveyed what we showed you. You saw what we wanted you to see. Primitive species barely capable of interplanetary travel, no threat to anyone, easy to dismiss, easy to underestimate. You've been deceiving the consortium for decades. We've been surviving. There's a difference. Elelina stood and walked to the observation window, looking out at the stars. When we first encountered the consortium, we saw how the galaxy worked. The strong exploit the weak. Powerful take what they want. Refugees are left to die on barren rocks. We saw all of that and we made a choice. She turned to face Varaxis. We chose to become strong, not to conquer, but to make sure that no one could bully us into abandoning people in need, not to threaten, but to ensure that when we made promises, we could keep them. This is an act of aggression. This is a revelation, nothing more. We have not fired a single weapon. We have not threatened anyone, we have simply shown you that we cannot be pushed around. Elena returned to her seat. Villains stay, the cameras keep rolling. And if the consortium has a problem with that, you're welcome to file a formal complaint. Varaxis looked around at his fellow delegates. Their expressions range from shock to fear to something that might have been grudging respect. The mathematics of the situation were clear. Whatever they had assumed about humanity was wrong. Whatever plans they had made were obsolete. The consortium will need time to consider this new information, Varaxis said stiffly. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, would you like a tour of the Martian settlements? I'm sure the villain would be happy to show you what a real refugee response looks like. The tour was not optional. Elena made sure of that. Consortium delegates who had expected to observe human failure now walked through thriving communities surrounded by happy refugees and dedicated volunteers. Vain children splashed in warm pools, while their parents cultivated gardens of engineered plants. Schools operated with mixed human and Veil classrooms. Clinics provided free medical care to anyone who needed it. Varaxis remained silent through most of the tour. His aides took notes and recordings, their usual arrogance replaced by uncomfortable uncertainty. They had come expecting to take control of a humanitarian disaster. Instead, they found a flourishing society that made their own refugee policies look cruel by comparison. The tour ended at the main observation platform in Dome 1. From there, the delegates could see the full extent of the Martian settlement. 20 interconnected domes, thousands of hectares of climate-controlled habitat, and construction crews already expanding into new territory. This is what we can do in 25 days, Elena said. Imagine what we can accomplish in 25 years. A Veiler approached the group. It was Kylethos, the poet who had been among the first to land. He walked with the dignity of someone who had survived unimaginable loss and found something worth living for on the other side. High Delegate Varaxis, Kelto said, his voice steady. I recognize you. You were the official who oversaw our initial processing when we fled our home world. You told us that the consortium would find a solution for us. You told us to be patient. Varaxis said nothing. We waited. We were patient. We watched our children sicken in crowded ships. We sang death songs for friends who did not survive the journey. We lost hope. Kalos gestured at the dome around them. And then we met the humans. Consortium has limited resources. Varaxis began. The consortium has resources beyond counting. You simply chose not to use them for us. Kilos stepped closer to the High Delegate. I am old now. I will not live to see what the galaxy becomes, but my grandchildren will, and they will remember. They will remember who abandoned them and who saved them. They will remember who saw them as a burden and who saw them as neighbors. He turned to Elena. My people have lost our home world. We cannot recover what was taken from us. But thanks to humanity, we have a future, and in that future we will stand with you, whatever comes, wherever the path leads. The Valen will remember what you did for us. Elena felt her throat tighten. We just did what anyone should do. No, Kalos said firmly. You did what anyone could do, but what almost no one does. That is what makes it remarkable. The consortium delegates departed that evening. Their ships climbed out of Mars orbit and jumped to hyperspace without ceremony or farewell. They would report back to their governments, their corporations, their various masters. They would explain that humanity was not what they had assumed. They would recommend caution. Elelina watched them go from Unity Station. Thomas stood beside her, still processing everything that had happened. "Do you think they'll try something?" he asked. "The consortium doesn't like being embarrassed. They might, but now they know the cost would be high, and more importantly, now the galaxy knows." Alina smiled. "That footage is already spreading across 1,000 worlds. Beings are watching what we did here. They're asking questions there. Governments don't want them to ask. Why can't we help refugees like that? Why do corporations face no consequences for destroying home worlds? Why have we accepted that cruelty is just how things are? You planned this from the beginning, not just the settlement, the whole thing, the hidden fleet, the reveal, all of it. Planned is a strong word. We prepared. We waited for an opportunity to show the galaxy who we really are." She looked out at the stars. "The consortium expected us to fail or to refuse. Instead, we exceeded their wildest nightmares, and now they have to deal with the consequences." "What consequences?" "Hope," Elena said simply. "We've shown the galaxy that there's another way, that you don't have to accept the world as it is, that compassion can win if you're willing to fight for it." She turned to face her assistant. "That's more dangerous to their power than any fleet we could build on Mars in a pool in Dome 1. Mira floated on her back and watched the stars through the transparent ceiling. Her grandmother, Sally, sat at the water's edge, composing poetry. For the first time since they left their home world. "Grandmother," Mira asked, "do you think we're safe now?" Sale considered the question. Safety was not something their people had known for a long time, but this place, these humans, this impossible miracle of warmth and water on a frozen world, "I think we are safer than we have been in many years," Sally said carefully, "and I think our human friends will keep working to make us safer still." "They're strange, aren't they, the humans?" "Yes," Sally agreed with a smile. "They are strange and wonderful and completely unlike anything the galaxy expected, and I think that may be exactly what the galaxy needs." Mira closed her eyes and let the warm water hold her. Tomorrow there would be work to do, schools to attend, a new life to build, but tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt at peace. Above them, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, indifferent to the tiny dramas of mortal beings. But on the red planet below, something new was taking root, something that would change the course of galactic history. The humans called it hope, and they were just getting started. 6 months had passed since the consortium fleet retreated from Mars. In that time, the red planet had transformed beyond recognition. The original 20 domes had grown to 50. The constructor swarms continued their work, eating Martian soil and producing building materials at rates that defied conventional engineering wisdom. New wetlands spread across the landscape, their boundaries slowly extending as terraforming accelerators pumped water, vapor, and engineered organisms into the thin atmosphere. Governor Chen stood on a balcony in the newly completed administrative hub overlooking what locals had started calling New Valera. Below her, a bustling city stretched every direction. Velen and humans walked the streets together, speaking a growing pidgin language that blended elements of both cultures. Markets sold goods from Earth alongside veiling crafts made with Martian materials. Restaurants offered fusion cuisine that neither species had imagined possible. It was beautiful. It was also only the beginning. Ambassador Vasquez arrived from Earth for the 6-month celebration. She had aged visibly since their last meeting. The political battles on the galactic stage took their toll, but she carried herself with the same determination that had defined her from the start. Consortium is still furious, Elelena reported as they walked through the city together, but they can't do anything about it. The footage from the settlement went viral across 1,000 worlds. Public opinion has shifted dramatically. How dramatically? 3 consortium member species have formally requested guidance on implementing humanitarian reforms. 2 corporations have been forced to divest from the Harvest Combine due to investor pressure, and there are protest movements on at least 50 worlds demanding better treatment of refugees. Chen shook her head in wonder. All because we helped 2 million people. All because we showed that helping was possible. Most beings in the galaxy have been told their whole lives that cruelty is inevitable, that the system cannot change, that compassion is weakness. We proved otherwise. They paused at a viewing platform overlooking the main wetland of New. Hundreds of villains swam in the warm waters below, their bioluminescent skin glowing softly in the artificial twilight. Human children played on the shores alongside youngsters, their laughter mixing in the humid air. We received a message from the Harvest Combine last week, Elelena said quietly. Oh, they want to negotiate. They're offering reparations to the villain people, land grants, resource compensation, the works. She smiled grimly. 6 months ago, they called the Valen an acceptable business expense. Now they're desperate to avoid becoming an example of what happens to species that cross humanity. What did you tell them? I told them they villain would decide what they want. It's not our place to negotiate on their behalf. Elena paused. But I also mentioned that we're watching and that the galaxy is watching with us. On the surface below, Kilos was leading a ceremony at the Memorial Garden, a quiet space dedicated to those who had died during the journey from Valera Prime. Stone monuments bearing Vel names stood in rows beside artificial streams, each marker decorated with offerings and remembrances. The old poet stood before a gathering of several thousand villain and humans. His voice carried across the crowd thanks to subtle amplification technology built into the garden's design. We gather today to honor those we lost. Kalos began. Our parents, our children, our friends who did not survive to see this new world. They died in darkness far from home with nothing but hope to sustain them. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the crowd, but their hope was not in vain. They dreamed that someone somewhere would see their suffering and choose to help. They dreamed that the galaxy was not as cruel as it seemed, and those dreams brought them here to people who proved that kindness can still exist. Kielthos turned to face the human section of the crowd. Humanity did not save us because it was easy. They saved us because it was right. They looked at 2 million strangers from a dying world and said, you are worth the effort. You are worth the sacrifice. You deserve a chance to live. He bowed deeply. Gesture of profound respect in villain. Culture for that we will never forget. For as long as the Valley exists as a people, we will tell this story. We will teach our children and our children's children about the humans of soul who built paradise on a barren rock, and wherever the galaxy leads, whatever challenges we face, we will stand with humanity. This is our oath. This is our bond. The crowd erupted in applause, Valen and human voices blending together in celebration. In the crowd, Mira stood beside her grandmother. Salith, the young Valen, had changed in the past 6 months. The fear that had haunted her eyes was gone, replaced by something steadier. She had started attending the mixed schools, learning alongside human students, making friends across species lines. Grandmother Mira said, "Do you remember when you told me to wait before singing death songs?" Sally smiled. "I remember. I'm glad I waited. I'm glad we all waited." The old poet put her arm around her granddaughter. "So am I, little one, so am I." That evening, the celebration continued in the main dome. Music filled the air, a blend of Valen harmonics and human rhythms that had evolved naturally. Over the past months, dancers moved on temporary stages, performing pieces that drew from both cultures. In a quiet corner of the gathering, Alina sat with cows, watching the celebration unfold. "You asked me once why we helped you," Alina said. "I gave you an answer, but I don't think it was complete." "Tell me the complete answer then," Alina thought. "For a long moment, when I was young, my grandmother told me a story about her grandmother who survived a great disaster in her country. She lost almost everything, her home, her community, her way of life, but strangers helped her. They gave her food and shelter and a chance to rebuild. They didn't ask for anything in return. They just saw someone in need and chose to act." She looked out at the dancing crowd. "My grandmother told me that story so I would understand something important. The kindness of strangers can save the world, not kindness from obligation or kindness for reward, but kindness because it's the right thing to do." She told me that one day I might have a chance to pass that kindness on, to be the stranger who helps when no one else will. Kilos nodded slowly. "And when you saw my people suffering, I saw my grandmother's grandmother. I saw every refugee who ever needed help and didn't receive it. I saw an opportunity to be the species that chooses differently." Ileli Nemed's eyes were not perfect. "Kethos, humans have done terrible things to each other throughout our history, but we've also done wonderful things, and when the galaxy handed us a test, we chose to reach for the better parts of ourselves, and now we keep building, not just here on Mars, but everywhere we can reach. We've shown that compassion is possible at scale. We've shown that the consortium's way isn't the only way, and we're going to keep showing it again and again until the galaxy understands." Q's was quiet for a long moment, then he spoke in a voice thick with emotion. "On my home world we had a saying, the water remembers every hand that touches it. Every kindness, every cruelty, every choice leaves its mark. The water carries those memories forward, shaping what comes next." He gestured at the celebration around them, at the pools and streams that made this Martian city feel like home. "You have touched the water, ambassador. You have left your mark, and the galaxy will remember." Year later, the first Valandal traveled to Earth. They were greeted by millions of humans who gathered to welcome them. who lined the streets of every major city, who cheered and waved and showed the watching galaxy what humanity meant by hospitality. Mira was part of that delegation. She walked through streets she had only seen in recordings, breathed air that was thicker and warmer than Mars, looked up at blue skies that reminded her of nothing she had ever known, and everywhere she went, humans smiled at her. They learned her name, stumbling over the Velen pronunciation, but trying anyway. They offered her food and drink and friendship. They asked about her life on Mars, about her grandmother's poetry, about her hopes for the future. She understood then what the humans had been trying to tell her all along. It wasn't about resources or politics or galactic strategy. It was about seeing another being in need and choosing to help. It was about treating strangers like neighbors and neighbors like family. It was about the simple, radical belief that kindness mattered. And the 5 years after the arrival, Mars had a population of 12 million. Half were villain, half were human, and a growing number were children of mixed heritage, raised in a culture that blended the best of both species. The consortium had changed as well, though slowly. The reforms demanded by public opinion were gradually implemented. The harvest combine was broken up, its assets distributed to its victims. Other refugee populations received aid that had been denied for generations. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to undo all the harm that had been done. But it was a start, and through it all, humanity kept building. They helped where they could. They welcomed those in need. They showed the galaxy over and over again that there was another way to exist in the universe. On the 10th anniversary of the Vane arrival, a ceremony was held at the original landing site in New Valara. Governor Chen, now retired, stood beside Ambassador Vasquez, now serving as Secretary General of the United Earth Council. They watched as Cathos, ancient and frail but still composing poetry, unveiled a monument that had been years in the making. It was a simple structure, a fountain of water flowing over red Martian stone, surrounded by gardens that bloomed with plants from 3 worlds. At its base, an inscription in both and human script. Here strangers became neighbors. Here kindness became home. Here the galaxy learned what humanity could be. Elena stood before the gathering, looking out at the crowd of Valen and humans who had traveled from across the solar system to attend. She was old now, her hair fully gray, her face lined with decades of struggle and triumph, but her eyes still held that same fire that had driven her to accept 2 million refugees on a frozen rock. When the consortium gave us the villain, she said, they expected us to fail. They expected us to prove that compassion was weakness, that kindness was impractical, that the galaxy's cruel ways were the only ways. She smiled. We built paradise instead. The crowd cheered, a sound that echoed across the domes of New Valara and bounced off the ancient mountains of Mars. But our work isn't finished. There are still refugees in this galaxy who need homes, still species being exploited by corporations and governments that don't care about their suffering, still cruelty and injustice waiting to be challenged. Elena raised her hand to quiet the crowd. So here is my message to the galaxy. On this 10th anniversary of the day humanity showed what it could do, we're still here, we're still building. And if you need help, come find us. Our doors are open, our hands are ready, and We will never ever stop believing that kindness can change the universe. She stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. Beside her, kilos leaned close and spoke words that only she could hear. The water remembers. Ambassador, and it always flows forward. Elelina smiled and watched the fountain splash and sparkle in the Martian sunlight. Around her, two species who had once been strangers celebrated together as one people. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not weapons or technology or military might. Just the simple, powerful truth that when someone needs help, you help them, and that in the end was enough to change everything. Above them, through the dome's transparent ceiling, Earth hung. In the Martian sky, a small blue marble that kept surprising a galaxy that had underestimated it. And in the pools below, children of two worlds played together, laughing, because that's what children do when they're safe and loved. And home, the galaxy had thought it knew what humanity was. The galaxy had been wrong, and it was just the